Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Rawson, and you've just joined Future Proof Your Internal Audit Program, a webinar presented by the DeSera Group for the purpose of getting to know, for you to get to know us and for us to hopefully get to know you a little bit and what your goals in your internal audit growth this year would be. Our agenda for today is that we're going to focus on 4 focus areas to future-proof your audit program. So if you have a pencil and paper right now, or if you'd like to download the handout, you can go onto the handout panel of the GoToWebinar display. By the way, if that display is in your way, all you need to do is there should be a little orange arrow in the upper corner of your control panel for GoToWebinar. If you just click that little orange arrow, it'll make the panel collapse and you'll be able to see our full screen, or just move it over onto another screen. Anyway, you can go down to the handouts panel and you can download today's presentation. You'll also get an email tomorrow with a link to a video of this presentation and another link to the handout, to the copy of the presentation that you can get. So now this is what you want to write down: the 4 focus areas to future-proof your audit program. These will be hopefully what you take away from this webinar and discuss with your team, and you're able to say, hey, are there some things we could be doing differently in 2020 than we've done in the past? Some ways that we could augment our program to make it more valuable in 2020 and beyond, so it's something that the organization has a pull for. First of all, the first focus area is management commitment, followed by auditor selection. Can you guess what the next one would be that would guide you to have a future-proof audit program, one that is in demand? Just like any process, for the program to have goals and performance measures. And finally, once you've selected those auditors, gotten management commitment, and gotten program goals and performance measures, you need to be sure that you've got auditors with the correct skills for conducting audits. Finally, we'll go into your next steps, your takeaways from this presentation. Now, I mentioned I'm Karen Rawson from the DeSera Group. I'm the vice president of the organization, along with my partner Dave Santacola as the president. We've been in business as management consultants since 2008. And not only do we work with companies to start up management systems like ISO 9001, ISO 27001, and others, but we also do internal audits, gap assessments, supplier audits, and investigations into why processes failed when there's a problem that actually makes it out to the field. And we also do on-site and virtual instructor-led audit courses and these free live webinars, live and recorded webinars, to help you in ways if you don't have training available to you, you can attend the webinars, and the on-site and virtual instructor-led training are very cost-effective if you've got groups of 5 or more people who need training just for your organization. Well, you're in the right place in this webinar if you're an auditor for sure. Whether you're an internal auditor, a supplier auditor, or a CB, you're probably part of the overall program, and you want to be sure that the work that you do contributes to the productivity and quality improvement without wasting anybody's time. So hopefully in this webinar, particularly if you're an internal auditor, you'll get some ideas to improve your own and your team's skills. But this goes for supplier audits as well. And if you're a CB, looking at, well, are there some opportunities to improve processes, improve results, improve risks that you might, reduce risks that you might point out to your clients? Quality professionals in general are asked to resolve problems with that come up because of internal audits, and sometimes it may be just a little frustrating when you get audit results that don't give you a lot to go on. So to the extent that you can contribute to your audit program by leveraging your skills as a quality professional to drive improvement into the audit program, you're in the right place. Now, process owners are the people who own the processes that you go out to audit. So if a process owner is the victim or the key participant in your audit, you don't want the kind of person who's like, oh heck, here's an audit, it's going to be disruptive. You want somebody who welcomes you in. As a process owner, you want to be welcoming in the auditors and knowing that you're going to get actionable feedback to make improvements in the processes within your own department and across other departments. To the extent that you can participate in the audit program, and I'm going to give you some ideas rather than just be the recipient of an audit team coming into your area, you'll be able to continually improve the audit program. And finally, senior leaders need to know that they can trust internal audits that will provide true insight into the risks of the business. Well, then you need to also be participating with your internal auditors to make sure, and your program leader to be sure that the program is all it can be. Now, we talk in ISO 9001-2015 about being aware of risks, risk-based thinking. Now, risk-based thinking applies not just to product risks, but also to process risks. What might be going wrong in your processes, or what could go wrong that would lead to bad things happening in the business? I think a lot of audit program managers, participants in audit programs, and the auditors themselves sometimes don't get the entire story of what happens if you simply fail to detect a process error in the course of an internal audit. Well, likely what happens if there's somebody is not following a process as planned, there are workarounds going on. Somebody's figured, I have a slightly better way to do this, or, well, if the other department's not going to do this, I'm not going to bother them to fix it. This is the way we're going to do it from now, I'll just show. But that can lead to lost productivity. If the original process was lined out to be most productive and also most least likely to produce errors or slow down, so that undetected process error that may be missed in an internal audit can contribute to lost productivity in your company. That's a risk to the internal audit program of failing to detect something that's actually there. The lost productivity will probably lead to, if you're not following your process, it very well may lead to undetected product flaws that get out to the customers. They're dissatisfied, and ultimately, what started with a simple undetected process error could ultimately lead to lost business if bad product and bad services get out to the field. Now, I didn't do the opposite of this chart, which is what if there is no process error, there is no problem, and an auditor writes up a non-value added audit finding. Here's something that is wrong that's not actually wrong. Well, what happens is you still get the lost productivity factor of somebody having to go back and answer a non-value added audit finding, something that is just an auditor's suspicion without any evidence of the nonconformance actually happening, or an auditor who kind of makes up a requirement as they go along because they think that's the way it's supposed to be. So it's truly a risk to the business of having auditors in an audit program who either miss findings or who write findings down that really don't make sense to resolve. Well, why do internal audits in the first place if you're certified to ISO 9001? Because it's a requirement. Clause 9.2 of ISO 9001 and of related standards, they're all organized in the same way, with clause 9.2 being an internal audit, and it says you shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals to see that your management system conforms to your own requirements for quality management and what the standard says, and that it's effectively implemented and maintained. Meaning, are you getting the results that you want from that quality management system? 9.2 also requires that your organization plan, establish, implement, and maintain an audit program, including the frequency, methods, responsibility, planning requirements, and reporting, taking into consideration processes concerned, changes in the organization, and results of previous audits. And it has some more information about what needs to happen in the audit program. So basically in 9.2.2, it's saying you have to have an audit program, and the way you run a program is through a business process, which takes us earlier in the standard to clause 4.4.1. Now this clause I call the Cliff's Notes or Spark Notes, whatever your generation used, of ISO 9001. If you do everything that clause 4.4.1 says with full intent to reduce risks and improve the business, you're probably going to do fine on an ISO 9001 audit without even looking at the rest of the standard. This summarizes everything you have to do. For each process, for your quality management system, you need to establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve the system, which means you also have to plan, implement, and establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve the processes needed for your management system. Well, internal audit is one of the processes of your management system. It's required by the previous slide we saw in 9.2. It's a required process. So it says that you have to determine the processes, one of which is internal audit, looking at the inputs and the outputs, the sequence and interaction. And then it says, letter C, very important, determine and apply the criteria and methods, including monitoring, measurement, and related performance indicators needed to ensure effective operation and control of your processes. So look at that. If you have a production process, I'll bet you have ways of knowing whether it's working right. You know, what's the yield per hour, or what's the scrap rate, or what is the defects at station 1 that are detected, whatever it may be. You've got ways of measuring your process to know if it's doing a good job. You're also supposed to define the risks associated with each process. So probably for a production process, you've got something like you've done a failure mode and effects analysis, or you've got assembly drawings that talk about where are the risks of making poor product in here, and there would be other risks identified. You've got to ensure the process achieves its intended results, and you've got to improve the process. So all those things that apply to production processes or design processes or warehouse processes also apply to your internal audit process. So I'd ask you, how has your company considered risks in your internal audit process? Remember, I talked about simply failing to detect a process problem or writing down a non-conformance when none exists are two of the risks associated with your internal audit process. You know what 4.4.1 says you need to do the plan, do, check, act model to all of your processes. Establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve. So this applies to your internal audit process as well. You need to plan your internal audit process, including the objectives and what are the risks associated with that process. Define the risks associated with your internal audit process. Then you work the process, you conduct your internal audits and have your reviews and maintain your documents and so forth, according to the process you've defined, achieve your objectives, and you mitigate risks along the way. Then you look at your measures, you measure the process and analyze it to be sure that you are getting the results that you intended to when you set out. And you look at your risk management actions to be sure those are being addressed within your process. And finally, you act to improve your internal audit process. Use feedback to improve effectiveness and reduce risks overall. So this plan, do, check, act cycle is what ISO 9001 and related standards are built on, and it's what you're supposed to do for all processes, not just your core processes, but your support processes as well. And when DeSera goes in to do internal audits, this is what we look for in all of the different processes in a business. Sometimes when a company asks us to come in and do their internal audits for them, they really haven't done this for an internal audit program. They haven't really defined the process. They just know they have to do them. Well, just like defining a business process such as a production process, I use a modified turtle diagram, which is available from the DeSera group. I believe we have it on our website as one of the downloads, or you can request it after class if you'd like this. If you'd like this in Word or PDF, PowerPoint or PDF format. A modified turtle diagram, and I created this one as if we were doing this in a class and you were all my participants on how to plan an internal audit program. So if you have a copy of this, or if you're sketching one of these as you go, you might want to number these boxes as I fill them in, because this is a technique that I use very effectively when consulting with clients on defining their processes. It's an old tool, and it's old because it's been around a long time because it actually works. So we start with naming the process in the middle of it. or internal audit program management. So this is the turtle diagram, or the process overview for program management, not for conducting an individual audit. You got two processes within the internal audit program. You've got the program management itself, and then the conducting and closing the audits. So this one is about managing the program. And I just put in there typically a director of quality, might be a VP of quality, might be a quality systems manager. Somebody is the owner of that process, and that process should have an owner just like any other process. The second box that I go to on defining a process is the objective. And the objective of an internal audit program ought to be something like evaluate the compliance and effectiveness of the management system versus the standard and our internal requirements, so corrections and improvements can be made. And if you asked any member of management if it's important to have an audit program, they would probably say that that one is, they would probably say that, yep, that's why we have it, that's why we do it. So while I go through the rest of this, I'd like to ask you to go over to your control panel for the GoToWebinar control panel. Scroll down on there to the questions bar and open that up. And you can ask me any questions in there that you may have, but I'd also be interested in just getting some chatter. Only the hosts can see, only myself and my assistant Mariah, who's on the line with me, can see your posts, but I'm going to read some of them out. Let me know. Do you, I'd like by, actually, let's just do this an easier way rather than the chats. Let's do a show of hands. On the control panel, there's a way that you can raise your hand. It's got a little hand raise button there on the panel, and you can raise your hand. Tell me if you have defined audit program management as a process. Please raise your hand. This is just an informal poll. I'm going to go down the list and see who's got hands raised in a minute, and I'll report back when I finish this chart. How many people believe that they have a well-planned internal audit program based on what you see here? So you may not want to answer right away. Not that you have to do it this way, but does your plan include all of these things? The next box that I go to on a process overview is the outputs of the process. So if we're going to achieve those objectives, what would be our outputs? The outputs of program management would be the schedule, which needs to go to process owners and relevant leadership. We also have competent auditors. As part of program management, we develop competent auditors, which means our process has to say, how do we make competent auditors? And then the third output is audit reports, and those are delivered to the corrective action process. Then I look at the inputs. Well, the inputs to your audit process, to the audit program management, I should say, the inputs to the audit program management would be, what are the business processes? What are the risks to business objectives of those processes? And I should have a pool of untrained auditors that I'm going to include in this program. These are the pieces of what are the inputs to having an audit program. Maybe you repeat this on an annual basis. The process steps would be the next box I would fill in on defining an audit program process. First thing I do is I get leadership input, plan the schedule, then train the auditors. And these are just the big chunks. This is not a work instruction for doing these. It's just an overview of how does the process work. Then we have to monitor the performance of audits, because actually conducting the program is embedded in the audit process. Monitor their, that would be the audit process itself. Monitor the performance, retain records, and improve the audit program. Improving the audit program would imply that we've got some sort of measures for our process, right? Who's going to be involved? Well, the audit program manager, probably the director of quality, has the overall responsibility. Process owners for each process, the internal auditors, and you may have, what I recommend is having an internal auditor trainer or coach, somebody who's in the role of making sure auditors maintain their competence. The next box that I look at for an overview of the audit program is the with what. What are the tools and materials that we're going to use? Are there any standards? Are there anything that stays the same as we go through this process? Well, ISO 19011, if you haven't read it, it is the standard that says how should audits be conducted. and it should, it's not shalls, it's not a standard you can get certified to, but your CB auditors will be looking, have you covered the intent of ISO 19011, the guidance of it? And it is the standard on which all of DSERA's internal audit courses are based. So you know, even if you haven't read the standard, when you go through one of our internal audit courses, you will get either the internal audit or the lead auditor version of what's in that standard that you would need to know. Then in addition to the standard on how to audit, you'd have the criteria you're auditing against, such as ISO 9001, other documented documents such as internal procedures, templates, tools, ways that you would, what it is you're auditing the organization against, and also any internal templates or tools you use to record results and write reports, for example. Then we get down to how do we measure this process? And we'll talk about this in a little while. There are process measures out the yin-yang for a lot of production processes, but not necessarily for the white-collar processes or the support processes that underlie production and design and so forth. So I listed some of the items that you might use to measure your process or to monitor it. Timeliness, you know, did we do it on time for the audit itself, getting the report out and closing the audit? Are auditees satisfied with what we do? Not many companies actually poll their auditees and say, were you satisfied with the audits that we performed? And then management satisfaction, are they satisfied with the results that they get? Are you in some way giving feedback to management and then seeing if they like what they got? Or do you just deposit an audit report in a repository, maybe make an oral presentation, and you don't really ask if your ultimate customer is satisfied? So that's an example of a process measure. And then auditors themselves. In organizations where auditors are volunteers and they come for 1 to 3 to even more years, you want to be sure that those auditors are getting their needs met for participating in the program. Finally, the last box on this is something that should be on every process diagram or some way of defining it with each process that you define, the risks to the process. Well, one that I mentioned, the risk to an internal audit itself or any kind of audit is the failure to detect a finding or the false detection of a finding that's not really a requirement. It makes a bunch of busy work for people to say, I shouldn't have to do that. But looking at the overall management of an audit program, these are the risks that I define, and maybe you have some more in your business. If you lack leadership engagement, if you lack competent auditors who don't have the time, the training, or the oversight abilities, if your schedule is not completed or if it's late, that's a risk of the audit program. Insufficient depth and detail of reports, you don't get the change that you want, and if you miss nonconformities, or that could say incorrectly document nonconformities. So those would be some of the risks. This step right here, if you hang up right now, this step right here of formally planning your program management and understanding the risks to program management so you can do something about those risks, that's worth showing up for the first 25 minutes of this audit, I hope. Now, I said I wanted to see a show of hands. I'd like to see a show of hands of the people who believe that they currently have a well-planned audit program. So if you know you have a well-planned audit program, please raise your hand. And I'm going to see if I can look down the list of participants and see who's raised their hands. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, that looks like maybe 40% of the people on this call. And I recognize a number of names that I'm saying, yep, I believe that, yep, Mark has a well-planned program. I know Rob has a well-planned program. Some of these people I know that I've worked in their businesses, but others, I'm very pleased to see that it's there. But I would also say if you don't have it planned, this can help you distinguish your audit program by having it planned, having measures, and getting the management support that you're looking for. We started out saying where we were going to focus this webinar was on the 4 focus areas to future-proof your audit program. And all 4 of these have come up in that process management diagram that we just saw, but let's dig into each one of them carefully. Management commitment. Remember the second one, auditor selection. Do you have the right people on the bus in the first place? And then I harped on this one a lot, program goals and performance measures. You can't get better as a program, and your audit program will become irrelevant if you're not continually improving against your goals. And then finally, auditor skills. You could have great auditors, but if they don't keep getting better, your program won't keep getting better. So let's look first at the fundamental focus area of management commitment for improving the effectiveness of your program. The first thing is management needs to provide the resources for having an audit program. Management is the only group who can decide who's going to do what, and who's allocated to spend the time and company money on doing audits. So they need to allocate the people. If you're an audit program manager and you've got to go collar people to do audits and they don't have management buy-in, you're going to get reports that look like nothing more than something dashed off in the spare time because their boss doesn't really care. So when management is committed, they don't just put somebody whose time they can spare. They put the people who are going to benefit the business through their participation in the audit program. That's true management commitment. The time for them to work on it, does it show up on their allocation of time, or if they have to allocate it that way, is it listed on their performance appraisal as something that they're doing through the year? Is it well known that auditors need to be able to take the time to plan, implement, and carry out audits? And then money, if you've got people traveling across sites or if they have to track their hours to a project, have they been assigned properly? And if they're not going to apply people time and money from internally, management's commitment may be to apply those things partially externally, calling in external resources such as the DSERA group to do some or all of your internal audits. The next area of responsibility for management is their accountability. Management shows their commitment through accountability. It's written in clause 5.1 that they are accountable for the results of the overall management system. So what does that mean? It means ideally the accountability of management is peer-to-peer, that those managers have committed to one another through their annual performance appraisals, through the goals and objectives that they agree to for the overall audit program, that auditing is going to happen, that they're holding people accountable for the quality of planning, executing, reporting, and closing findings, and on-time completion of audits. So when your management team is committed, they make sure that people aren't constantly rescheduling audits. The second thing that management is accountable for is corrective action. Initial corrective action, we fix the one that got away, and long-term, holding their groups accountable for making sure that you don't get repeat, similar, or exactly the same non-conformances. People are very good about this with customer complaints, typically, but not so good about it with process problems. So this shows true management commitment if they've got that. Really incorporating internal audits as part of business as usual is what it takes for management to demonstrate their commitment to internal audit programs. Okay, let's see. I'm going to put down all the hands, and I'm going to ask again. I'll bet it's going to be that same ratio of about a third to a half the people feel that you have solid management commitment to your internal audit program. So raise your hand if you feel your company demonstrates solid management commitment to the internal audit program. Diane, I'm not surprised. I see that. Kimberly, I'm not surprised. I see several names here that I'm not at all surprised show that they have solid management commitment. It works out to be about that same 1/3 or maybe a little less of our participants in today's call feel they have solid management commitment. So be asking yourself, if you don't have solid management commitment, what would be a goal this year toward getting that? Have you explained to your management as a team, not just the program manager trying to collar people in the hallway, hey, you're a little behind on this, or can you help me out with that? Does the management team truly commit to the program? If you haven't asked them to, how do you know they will? They've all committed to the sales targets because that's the most important thing to the company. Have they, and maybe they've all committed to quality targets, but have they committed to the goals and objectives of an audit program? Okay, I'm going to take hands down and just give that another look, see if anybody else signed up. Yeah, it's probably a quarter to a half. So even the people who feel they have a solid plan may not have solid management commitment. You're not alone if you feel like you don't have it. Let's see, auditor selection. Now, I went into a company one time that sent their people to an audit training class. They called us in, and typically when we teach an audit class on site, it pays to have, if you have 5 or more people who need audit training, they're going to be your internal auditors, it pays to have us come on site and teach a class. We can talk all about your individual company issues and give examples and actually do an audit lab the next day where we go out and practice those skills, and the instructor gives you feedback and you give each other feedback peer-to-peer. Really work on improving your program within the class. That's a great opportunity. If you have 5 or sometimes even 4 people, it's worth having that internal class. You can also send people to public classes or to virtual instructor-led classes. And we'll be having our next virtual instructor-led class in March, where it'll be limited to a group of people small enough, 12 or fewer, where we can actually talk to one another. And it's just like being in a classroom, except we're on a screen like this, but I can see your faces when we do that. So anyway, the auditors they sent to this class I taught, it was a software development company, and they sent the facilities manager, which is important. You need to have somebody with expertise in all those things that it takes about business continuity, physical environment, and so forth. They sent an accountant who was a great detail-oriented person. She had great skills that would go well towards the audit function, though she didn't know anything about software development. They sent a receptionist who was the kind of person who wanted to get in on, I mean, she just loved her job, loved all the people there. She was enthusiastic as all get out, and she was looking forward to learning more about the company, but she didn't really have any competence in any of the business's processes other than what a receptionist does. So she had a lot of learning to go. And then there was the quality manager who understood the standard and how to audit, but again, didn't have the strongest skills in the different processes. So the first thing you need is somebody in your auditor selection. You need people who have knowledge and experience in the types of processes that your business actually runs. If you can't spare the people with the knowledge and experience of how the business should be run and what customers want and so forth, if you're just putting all entry-level engineers in there, or entry-level, you're using a lot of hourly workforce, for example, that understands a lot of the production process but doesn't understand the bigger picture, you probably want to augment your audit team and get a good mix of career knowledge and experience. Curiosity and enthusiasm that facilities manager and receptionist had were admirable. You need people in your audit selection who want to be there. They need to be conscientious, not just say, oh yeah, we've been doing it that way for years. You need to have people who will question, what does the requirement actually say? What does the customer requirement actually say versus what we're actually doing? I went out to do an audit that had been done by internal auditors. They called us in to help augment their audit program because they were getting close to their certification body's 3-year reassessment. And I went in, and one of the first things that I did was pull a customer contract and look for quality requirements in the customer contract. And they said, are you sure you need to be doing that? We've never had an auditor do that before. And it's like, well, that's actually something that's supposed to be done. And perhaps your CB auditor has been doing it when you didn't realize they were doing it. And if they weren't, shame on them, because being conscientious enough to look at all the different places, not just ISO 9001 clauses, but all the places where requirements of your quality management system exist, is important. You can't have somebody who wants to go out there and do an audit and just look at the obvious. They have to be willing to turn over a rock. Now, I've got a trend going here, 4 C's, communication. The person has to be able to communicate with their auditees in language that the auditees understand. They have to be comfortable dealing with the levels that they'll be communicating with, and they have to be comfortable reporting on what they've done. Now, that can be distributed. The communication piece, not everybody's going to have the same level of skill and experience in that, but you want to match people up with others who complement their skills for that ability to conduct interviews at different levels and document. And I break the pattern the last auditor selection criterion I want you to look at is diversity. So if all your people look the same in terms of their career knowledge and experience, or the departments that they come from, or their past history, their age, what level they are in the business, you're probably going to get a biased audit. It's ideal to be able to send people out at least 2 at a time on an audit, because they will look at and see different things, communicate with people differently, and they bring different backgrounds with them. One of the real reasons people like having DSERA auditors come in and support or do their audits for them is that we all bring at least 25 years of experience with us. We've been in and out of a lot of doors. We're not going to, we will recognize things that aren't going as you probably intend them to, and be very conscientious about going back in and looking at what were the requirements and were the requirements actually captured. So you want to be sure that your audit team has the right people on it to support long-term continual improvement of your audit program. The third area we were going to look into on future-proofing your audit program, the first one being management commitment, second one is auditor selection, the third one is that your program has goals and performance measures. Where I said that maybe a third to a half of the people had goals and performance measures, I'm going to put hands down now. Before I even go through this, you saw the ones that were on the other slide. You can begin answering now. Answer me if you believe that your audit program is monitored and measured. Okay, are there goals? Are there ways that you know if the program is meeting its goals and if it's getting better year after year? I hope that if you have those goals, you're communicating them to the entire management team, not just to yourselves as auditors. But that's the first step. So sometimes the only measure of audit performance is completion, not how well it's done, not the results of the audit, like how big and bad were the findings or anything, but rather just did we actually do an audit? And you see, if that's the only level of performance monitoring you're getting, that's probably all you're going to get. Audits will be done, and you have no idea if they're good or bad. So what you want to do, just like any process, you want to get feedback from different parts of the process to see if you're doing a good job. You want feedback from management. Did they appreciate the way that the audit was conducted, the time it took, the results that came back, the communication of what was happening before, during, and after the audit? Did they get results that they value? Whether you do that through a survey, through an interview, through maybe a management focus group where you're not there and you have a different person ask a series of structured questions, there are a lot of different ways you can get feedback from management. And it would be subjective in a lot of cases, unless you have objective things for them to measure against. One thing might be, did they feel their resources were well used during the audit if they ponied up volunteer auditors or even the people who were interviewed? Now you want to get feedback from the auditees themselves. Same kind of thing. You can call them together as a group and ask. You can ask the manager to ask the group. You can, at the end of each interview, you can be asking questions, but you may want some structured feedback from auditees that you would do in a survey format. You want feedback from the auditors themselves, because that's going to say, do we want to continue to participate in this role as auditors? Do I want to change jobs because I don't like auditing if I'm a full-time auditor, or do I want to do more audits, fewer audits? Do I need more support in terms of tools and methods? Do I need more training? So get feedback from the auditors. And then you can get feedback from your certification body as well. They should be looking at your internal audit program every time they come on site. If your CB simply looks at your audit program, looks the last one was done within the last year, all the processes were covered, there was some risk basis associated with it, you got reports, you got closure, great. You could probably probe with your CB for a little bit more information on, are they, what are they seeing in your internal audit program, as well as thoroughness, as far as risk basis, various areas that they may say that they've got some opportunities for improvement for you to drive the risk of your internal audit program lower. Make it more likely that you'll detect the actual nonconformities and not detect things which is not usually a problem, not detect things that aren't nonconformities. So what you're looking for in feedback is, does the management team even set expectations, and what do they set them for? Anytime there are expectations, there ought to be rewards and consequences for fulfilling those. And people who are involved in the program, be they auditors or the audit program manager, the people who are responsible for the work. I mean, imagine asking somebody to throw darts at a board all day long and they never know whether they hit the target. They need feedback on whether they're doing a good job and what they should change. So if you're a CB auditor or a supplier auditor, you may want to give some feedback on the internal audit program to the folks that you audit. And if you're involved with an audit program from the ground, internally, you want to be sure that you're getting feedback and that you've got measures or ways of monitoring things such as timeliness, quality, and cost. And timeliness would be of planning, implementing, reporting, and closing the audit on all four fronts. The quality of the audit itself, and the cost, if you've got a budget for this, such as toting up man hours or travel expenses or things like that. Then you want to communicate the feedback and the results of any measurements to the audit team and to leadership overall. Sometimes just pointing out to somebody the value of what you've done helps them make better use of it in the future. Okay, so we talked about the first three focus areas for future-proofing your audit program, being management commitment, auditor selection, audit program goals and monitoring, performance goals and monitoring, and now we move into auditor skills. If you're like a lot of companies, your auditors go through initial training where it's a 3-day internal audit course. Maybe they go away for it, maybe it's offered internally. But sometimes initial training just amounts to learning from somebody who's been on the program for a while, just on-the-job training for how to do audits. So let me ask you, I'm going to take the hands down. I forgot to finish the last question. We're just going to skip it, but I do want to ask, how many of you feel that that the training provided to your internal auditors is effective? The internal training and anything that may follow on. Raise your hand if you believe your audit program has strong auditor skills development. I shouldn't say strong, adequate. Is it effective in the training that internal auditors are getting? And I'll give you a few minutes to raise your hands for that while we go through a couple more of the points here. The initial training is only the start. To me, initial audit training is like putting a 15-and-a-half-year-old in driver's ed training in school, and then when they turn 16 and they get their license, you say, okay, go ahead, go downtown, navigate the city at night, parallel park on a busy street, you'll have no problem. In fact, go to New York City if you want. Initial training allows you to get behind the wheel and then begin to get your, as you get your experience, you become more qualified. So practicing with supervision and feedback. Initial auditors should get a great deal of supervision and feedback, but beyond that, experienced auditors should still be getting peer review of their audits. How does peer review work? Well, probably the most effective version of this I've seen was a company where the internal audit team, and there were a lot of them, this was floor level, hourly employees who were doing process audits of production, and they didn't get into the management processes. They were really working on peer review there, but they executed this so well. They gave up their lunch. This group of people gave up or it was catered, so it was welcome. But they would come to lunch, and each person who had done an audit in the last month would give a rundown of what they found. All of those had already been presented to management, but they give a rundown of what they found. And the peer auditors would talk to them about what were the requirements, who else saw something like that, was it well documented enough for somebody to take action on, and they developed a checklist for peer review of internal audit reports. That team was really on their toes, and their audit reports were respected by management. Another point that I think helps with auditor skills is rotating, not sending the same person back to audit the same area year in and year out. Also rotating them if you have them in pairs or groups of 3, rotating those groups around so that they get exposed to different areas. It's a real benefit of being an auditor, but it also helps increase their skills and keep them sharp. They don't keep going back and saying, yeah, I saw this before. So sometimes if you're auditing in pairs, just rotating out one of the members each time. So only one of the people did it last time, and then they bring a new partner this time. And then ongoing continuing education. I'm so pleased by the number of people that I see on this webinar and the version that we're having at 2 o'clock that you've had, you're here, you're taking time from your busy day. And to me, that means that your manager may also be pleased that you're a part of this, webinar, that it's encouraged in your business. And I'm preaching to the choir here because you're on the call. But what I'd suggest is that if you're an audit program manager and you find something in these webinars that's valuable to you, you mark that and you say, from minute 10 to minute 25, I want to do 15-minute view of that with my group, and we're going to talk about ways that we can do that in our company, how we can apply that. That would be an example of ongoing continuing education. Have those lunch and learns. Bring the whole audit team together to look over the CB's audit report and see what the CB is doing differently and what you may want to adapt into your own program, or what you may want to ask the CB to do differently next time to give you some feedback. All of those peer reviews, rotations, getting feedback from one another, augment the initial training, and really go to increase auditor skills over time to make the audit program future-proof. If all you're relying on is initial auditor training, your auditors are going to grow stale and your audit reports will go stale. So even companies, I've got a company down in Florida that calls us in every 3 years, and we do a new round of auditor training for them, for their new auditors. We do a refresher training for all the people who've been doing audits and they want to continue on mentoring the new auditors. So some people always rotate off and new ones rotate on. And so those experienced auditors get 1 day of classroom training on increasing their audit skills. We do some review, and then we do some case studies where they go through and some examples from their own work to say, how are we doing at mentoring our new auditors? So ongoing continuing education can be free in the form of webinars or asking people within your own group to make presentations and get feedback and get the group talking, or they can be formal training programs where you have people like DeSara come back in. So just to summarize what we went through, it's the management commitment. Are they providing the resources, the people, time, the money, and most importantly, the expectations for what this program ought to produce? The auditor selection, getting people with the personal characteristics such as their skills and experience, but also diversity. Think in terms of your audit team, not in terms of just individual auditors as you select your audit team overall and auditors for individual small focused audits. Do you have the right people conducting the audits? The third method, to future-proof your audit program, make sure that you've got goals and performance measures, that those are being reviewed and reported, and that you're improving against them. And finally, auditor skills, make sure they not only have the initial training, but they practice and they continue learning from peers, from experts, from rotation, and from the use of feedback. Now, I've been going through this presentation fairly slowly. I don't think there are tons of external excuse me, I just looked back at my screen for what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to tell you what did the group say about effectiveness of auditor skills training and reinforcement. And once again, it's in that 1/3 to 1/2 range. Probably this is the lowest of the 3 that I put out there for what management commitment or auditor selection. Auditor skills is probably the one where people are saying, no, we could really be doing better on that. And what I'd ask you to do at the end of this webinar is, we're right here at the beginning of the year, go ahead and make a list of some things you wish you could change in your internal audit program and bring that up in your staff meeting. Whatever level or part of the organization you're in, it's something that you could begin to say, hey, we have to do this anyway. Why don't we make it something worthwhile? Your next steps would be to evaluate your program based on what we talked about today and maybe some other ideas that came to you and some of those polls that I gave you to say, gee, I'm not alone in being a group that doesn't have great training, follow-on training for our auditors or feedback. Say, what could we be doing differently? Whoops, excuse me. I don't know where that came from. Hit the wrong button. Evaluate your program and from all 3 perspectives. You want to openly discuss needs with leadership. Don't just keep that evaluation in your little planner and say, I'm really going to work on it this year, especially if you were in the half to 2/3 of the group that said that you don't feel you've got a well-established goals or well-established management commitment. This is something that your audit program leader really needs to go and discuss with leadership. Once again, you don't want to be caught wasting people's time with audits that they only do because they have to. Discuss your ideas for improvement with your team, and then make a plan. This is one of the things that anybody involved in the audit program ought to be able to influence, if not actually direct, is plan for training and continuing education to become routine. If you have people who go to conferences or go to webinars or get feedback from certification body, there are plenty of ways that don't cost any money that you can beef up the training of your group. And so I wanted to show you some of the ways that Docera can help. We use these webinars to introduce you to us, and if you've noticed from our mailers, we seldom put out anything that says, sign up for this, buy that, please buy. We don't do that kind of thing. We do these webinars, and we hope that when the time for training comes up, you'll give us a call and see if this works for you. As I said, at $12.95 for internal auditor training for each person, it very quickly, if you've got an audit team, makes sense for your internal audit training to be brought in-house. So if you've got 4 to 5 people, and certainly if you've got more who need internal audit training, bring us in. Also, the internal auditor refresher training would add 1 more day on top of that. I also want to emphasize that this is one thing that we typically add on to our internal audit training classes, is an internal audit lab. And that can be anywhere from 1 to 5 days. So one thing, and all of these are tailorable. So an example of the kind, an internal audit lab means you go through 3 days of training on what does the standard say, what are the requirements, and what do we look at, what do we look for, how do we plan an audit, how do we write up nonconformances. You learn all that stuff, your head is spinning, and then on the second half of the 3rd day, instead of an exam, we plan the audit for the next day or 2 days, whatever it's going to be. And different small groups, 2 to 4 people go out and go after an individual process, come back with what they found, and we have a peer review on the audit lab day. We have a peer review of what they found and a closing meeting with the auditees, so you get practice presenting your findings and getting feedback from people. Not only that, the audits that we do as part of the lab count toward your internal audit program. You've got trained auditors with supervision, with reporting. That counts as an audit. So you may want to choose 3 or 4 production processes, and each member of the team is assigned to one of those to work on doing the audit lab. You've just knocked out 4 of your process audits for the year. We also do, in addition, and we tailor when we come inside. So we may make this a 4-day class if you've got lots of requirements and lots of really green people. But typically that 4 to 5 person range is where you'd want to go with in-house training. We have an audit program manager training. Now, we don't call this a lead auditor course. We don't call it a lead auditor course because it's not certified for certification body auditors to take yet. It may be in the future. That's one of my goals for this year, is to get our lead auditor course certified. But for now, we call it an audit program manager training. And what we do in there is we take the 2 or 3 or 4 people who may be, or as many as it takes, who may be leading audits as well as the audit program manager, and we work together on all these future-proof techniques as well as advanced audit techniques, advanced reporting techniques. You really get that full week. In addition, it can be bolted on to the end of an internal audit training class, and we can tailor that if we come inside for just and do it for just 1 day. And then, as I've said throughout the program, the Docera group can help you in some cases by outsourcing all of your audits, or in other cases only some of your audits, to our group. So, for example, that company that sent the 4 people, the facilities manager and the receptionist and the accountant to the training class, they realized that they could audit a number of parts of their business themselves, but they really could not spare programmers, people who really had the software technology experience to know if projects were following the requirements. They just couldn't spare people involved in projects to go to audit training and then to plan, conduct, report, and close audits. So they said, Docera, if you could come in and do 2 types of audits for us. 1, those related to design, and 2, those related to management. because they felt that a lot of their internal people weren't really comfortable auditing management at the higher levels. So those would be important areas to outsource part of audits to Docera. And then you knock those out. If you're doing annual audits, you knock those out for the year. As I said, we also do supplier audits, gap assessments if you're putting new requirements in place, and the after the fact when the manager says, gee, we've been passing our QMS audits, our ISO audits with no findings. How did we have this big spill into the field? How did this product get out and have all these problems? So we can do those. We can do those after the fact, really deep forensic management system investigations. This is a quote from Colin Powell, and it also reminds me of. Well, it reminds me. I'll just say this one. There are no secrets to success. It's the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. Now, if you want to have a successful internal audit program, it's a whole lot less complicated than having a successful military battle, but having a successful audit program over the long haul is not something that you can just do by saying we sent people to 3-day training class and we give them templates and a schedule to go audit to. You need to continually be learning and upgrading your skills and making sure you've got the right people who are enthusiastic and well-trained on the job. In conclusion, to future-proof your audit program, you want to plan your process for internal audits, including the objectives and risks. You want to work according to the process, mitigating risks, such as getting feedback from people along the way. You want to check that feedback and make sure that your risk management actions are yielding the results that you want. And finally, you want to use the feedback that you get to improve the effectiveness of your internal audit program and reduce the risks of either not completing the audits that you intend to or not finding information that's valuable to the business. And with that, we do have the Q&A panel open, but I don't see anyone who's asked a question at this point. But for those, boy, it looks like everybody's still on the call. That sure is gratifying to see the numbers still big at the end. I'd like by show of hands, would you please raise your hand, because you can't clap for me, but it makes me feel good going into the next one. Raise your hand if you felt you found something in this audit that you could take in this webinar that you could take back and improve your audit program with right now. So I love to see the show of hands going up all the way around the room. I didn't come in here to say, buy our training class. Of course, I sure hope you will. My contact information is there. And so if you're planning for later in the year and you'd like to customize something to come in internally or something that you want to send people to, if you have questions about our virtual classroom, we will be sending the mailings out about that. I think that's scheduled for the last week in March. And we do offer public classes in Dallas. If you're in another market and you want a public class, you're only going to send 1 or 2 people and you'd like to attend a classroom like at a hotel, please let me know and we'll see what we can work out for your area. I've got a lot of people who say, if you're coming to my town, I want to come, but we're just not big like the big audit companies who put audit training out there. So with that, if no questions are coming in, I thank you for all those raised hands here at the end. That makes me feel good. And I hope to see that you're, I'd love to hear some feedback from you if you're able to go out and implement some of these ideas. Thank you for attending today, and we hope to see you again on a future Docera webinar. Bye-bye, everyone.